Hello everyone. I'm cranking tubes, soft tubes. Let me know if you can hear me. Um, I finally got my laptop booted up and everything so that I can do lives again and need to make sure that the sound quality is good, or do I need to change the microphone? So if you could let me know, I would appreciate that. Wondering if this tube I need to try a tighter gauge. I think this does look fine. Does have some nice micro speckles on it. As you can see, it doesn't take me too long to crank up the saw, but it does take me a lot longer to wind the yarn on cones. It's weird how that works. And you can see how quickly the yarn feeds into the knitting machine. That's the reason why you want the yarn on a cone, so that there's no drag. I don't get a yarn bar for anything if it's a center pull ball. And if it's a cone, it just comes out a well wound cone. Then it just comes out freely, which is what you want. And the reason why I need to keep stopping is because the weights need to be moved up. As soon as the weight hits the bottom, there is no tension on the tube, and that is going to result in missed stitches. and skip stitches, and the yarn could even break at some point. So you always have to make sure you have a good weight going out there, so the stitches fall off every time the stitches are made. Almost to the end. This one. There we go. Cut that excess off. Now this yarn is a limited edition Lana Grossa yarn. If you can see that, it's merino hand dyed, and it is actually made in Italy. And I saw it is hand dyed in India. So, and I'm cranking these for somebody. I do provide cranking services, so that you can send me a sock and I'll crank them into tubes for you. So, and all you have to do is knit the heel, toe, and cuffs, and you'll be done. So on either end of the sock tube, I put some waste yarn, so it's easy for you to pick up the stitches. Do 20 rounds of waste yarn, and I will go ahead and separate one tube from the next with a string of nylon yarn. This just slips out easily when I'm ready to split the tubes. So just do one round of that between the two sock tubes and drop that down and put a waste yarn down again. 20 rounds again for the start of the next one. I need to check on my phone on Facebook whether you can actually hear me. Well, I hope you can hear me on my phone. Okay, I think you can hear me. I just heard myself on the phone, so hopefully all is good. So now I'm going to just move my weights up again. And we need to start with our next yarn. So that is done. All my sock tubes here. Don't look at the mess out here. I've been doing a whole bunch of other things. So I have approximately 22 sock tubes to do for this person. I have only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more left to do. So this is the next one. This is again the same yarn, so good thing I don't have to change the tension or anything, and I can just start. There was a knot in the beginning there. Let's get rid of that. Waste yarn is out of the way, and I'm going to thread up my actual sock yarn now. Make sure the weight is hanging on my tube. Start my new yarn, and we'll go slow first. There we go. one is almost giving like a spiral effect. Yeah, the weight has reached at the bottom. I can feel the stitches getting loose. Have to make sure to move the weight up. Uh, Nancy asks, Charan, do you have to switch arms from time to time? Not really. It's not a lot of effort to move this. It's well oiled. It doesn't take too much of arm strength to do it. So I'm actually fine. I will do like maybe 6 or 7 tubes at a sitting. I usually don't do more than that because it still takes time to do them, even though it's pretty fast. So just so that I don't tire myself, I think six to 7 tubes is what I do in one sitting. I don't sit and crank like 30 tubes altogether. So yeah, good question though. Though I will mention that when I am winding the yarn on the cones, because that also is a manual thing, that I cannot do more than two at a time. That actually hurts my arms more than actually cranking the tube. So getting a way to put the yarn on the cones more efficiently would be the ideal thing to have. Currently, I have a manual cone winder, which is this guy right here, and it works well, but it just takes a lot more effort and it's pretty slow. And actually takes me more time to put the yarn on the cone than it actually takes me to wind the yarn. And having a good wound cone is very critical for making soft tubes on the machine. Nancy asks, is there a weight needed on the knitted tube to help pull the knitted material down through the machine? Yes, there is, and this is the weight. That's the weight I keep moving up. So I don't know how much this is. This is probably 3 or 4 pounds, maybe. And there is a buckle at the bottom of the tube. You can see how my stitches just rose up when I removed it. And now when I hang it down, you'll see the knitted material get stretched down. So what happens is when the yarn goes through the hook of the needle goes down, catching the new yarn, and the previous loop slips out because of that weight on the tube. If that weight is off the tube or if the weight has reached the floor, that previous stitch does not pop out, because of which you'll end up with issues, slip stitches, yarn breaks, all kinds of weird stuff happens. So Nancy says, I have a weight system for both my mechanical spool knitter and for my flatbed knitting machine. Yes, for the flatbed knitting machine too, you need the weight. It's the same concept. I don't know, mechanical spool machine. S- oh, the one which creates like an I-cord. Is that what you mean? So if that's what you're talking about, it's exactly the same thing. This is basically a, just kind of like the I-cord one. It just has 64 stitches instead of the four stitches that that tiny spool, yeah, the I-cord knitter has. Yeah. Yeah, so the I coordinator has four stitches and this one has 64. But the concept is exactly the same. The yarn gets fed in the same way. The needles move up and down the same way. So you need that weight at the bottom for that stitches, for the old loop to fall off. Yeah, so see my weight has reached the bottom again, so I can move my buckle up and hang the weight off of that and then continue. Time to move the weight up again. This is making a really fun tube. Like, look at that. A nice spiral action going. I have never hand knit with this yarn before. It's really soft and really well dyed. I love the colors. Yeah, the pooling is really good. And you can see if, the yarn is not wound properly on the cone, it will not feed out freely. So even that like the slightest catch or anything, like you would have a yarn bath in a cake or something, can will cause issues because the yarn just feeds off the cone so quickly. Right? I don't think I can make another round, so I'm going to stop there. A little extra waste there. Nancy asks, do you measure or actually count the rows when you're doing an afterthought heel and toe? So when I do an afterthought heel and toe, though I'm not doing it for this, these are tubes I'm knitting for somebody else. If I'm doing an afterthought heel and toe for myself, I have a way of measuring where I need to cut in for the toe. What I do first, well, for the heel, but what I do first is I do knit the toe at the end of the tube. Then I know how many rounds are required for me to finish the heel, right? An afterthought heel will have, if it's a 64 stitch tube, there are going to be certain number of rounds you need, which will finish your tube, right? Which will finish the heel, which will be maybe you do two rounds without decreasing, and then after that you decrease 4 stitches every other round and get down to maybe 12 stitches towards the end, and then when you do a Kitchener. So you can actually calculate how many exact number of rows will take to finish the heel. I have a foot template for my foot, which basically is a cardboard cutout of my foot. And after I knit the toe, I just insert that into the tube with the toe in place. And because I know how many rounds it's going to take me to finish the toe, I can count that many rows from the end of my cardboard tube on that sock tube to know where exactly I need to cut. Because if I cut there and that's where I insert the heel, then that many number of rounds will get me to the end of my foot. Don't know if this makes sense, and if it doesn't, let me know. Um, I probably keep thinking I should make a very detailed video of how I do this, because no matter what kind of, there is also another pattern that I knit, Wendy Johnston's pattern on gusset heels, and I kind of use the same principle. Because every sock yarn, even if I hand knit, uh, my gauge could be slightly different, which means that I need to start my foot or my foot increases, or in that case, at a certain point. But because I know how many rounds are going to get me there, and I know what my gauge is because I've knit the thing, I can figure out where to start increasing my gusset stitches. And in this case, I know exactly when to cut it so that I can knit my heel. Nancy says, I hand knit my socks toe up, yes, and do a simple short row heel, and I figured out from some commercially knitted socks many years ago. Yes, and that, so even if you're doing like the fish lip kiss heel, which is like a simple short row heel, that works very well. Now, in that too, you know how many rows are going to you're going to need to do in order to finish that heel, right? So, and you know exactly when to start doing that heel based on the yarn that you have knit, because maybe that's the yarn you usually knit, it's the same gauge you get. So you can say, after 60 rows after the toe, I need to put that heel in. That works. But now if you are knitting with another uh, gauge, then you go by rows. Yes, and that is, if you're going to get consistent gauge for every yarn that you're knitting, if you get the same gauge, then it's fine. But if you have a different yarn, say you're going from fingering weight to sport weight, your gauge is going to be different, so you then cannot count by rows. But if you know how many rows it's going to take you to get to the end of your foot, you know when to start your short row heel that way. So because you can just measure, how many rows back you need to start your short row shaping for the heel. So I usually go by that rather than, by a number, because sometimes my gauge just changes. I usually just do yarn out of certain things, but sometimes fingering weight also comes in so many different ranges. There is heavy fingering weight and there's light fingering weight. So my gauge changes with both of them. And sometimes I have to do 60 rows and then do the heel. And sometimes I have to do 70 rows and do the heel. And now with handspun socks, that changes again. So with handspun socks, I do the same thing. I know how many rows it's going to take me to do the heel. I just look at how many inches that many rows is in the current sock that I've already knitted, toe up, and I'll know the point at which I need to start my heel shaping. So I hope that helps. Let me grab my next sock tube. Before I do that, I need to also add my waste yarn. So when I'm doing tubes for someone else, I will always add waste yarn to the beginning and end of the sock so they can easily pick up their stitches. Need to move the weight up again. 20 rows is good enough. And then cut the waste yarn out. What I do next is I add a nylon thread in between, which I have to steal from all the other tubes that I knit so far. This is a lot of tubes. See that was one of the ones which I was doing earlier, which has these real micro speckles, which looks really cool. Um, let's go to the very end. So I can show you this, which is pretty neat because so this pink yarn out here, this is all waste yarn, but the pink yarn out here is basically the nylon thread which separates the tubes. And why I use a nylon thread here is because I can easily I can see the start and end of this round because those stitches are loose, and I can just pick the start and end out. Hope you can see that, and just pull out the end. So those are the ends pulled out. I'm going to flip the sock tube on the other side. Just pick any one of the one of the stitches and just pull out that yarn, and it just comes off and separates my tube. There we go. So see, so I separate all my tubes that way before I ship out the yarn, and this is the nylon thread that I will be using again here. So Nancy says, what about approximate needle size does your machine knit up to? Again, so needle size depends on is the gauge at which a person knits, right? Like some people, because they have been knitting for so long, their gauge is so loose that they will knit on size one needles. Size 1 needles is generally what people knit sock yarn on. I still knit at size 1, and my gauge is still pretty consistent from previous years. But some people have to go down to 00 in order to get the same gauge. So I can tell you the gauge. So the gauge I get is approximately 8 to 9 stitches per inch. So you knit on size zeros, right? And what's more important is what gauge do you knit on rather than what needle size you knit on. So the gauge I get on my sock machine is close to 8 and 9, and it depends again on different yarns. Um, Different yarns knit at different gauges because I try to knit them as tight as I can with like maybe not completely as tight as I can. I could go tighter, but then it would just make a cardboard sock. You don't want that either. But I knit it as tight as I can and I go a notch lower, which for me it translates well if I need to knit my you know uh, heel and toe on size 1 needles like I usually do. It's kind of the same gauge. So if you generally knit your socks on size 0 needles with fingering weight yarn, I would suggest you knit the heel and toe also on size 0 needles because that's kind of the gauge I aim for, like kind of what usually a label on the yarn suggests what gauge you should knit on. And but again, sometimes even yarn from the same company will knit at different gauges because of a different dye on it. Like I have found when I knit with yarn that is dyed red, things change, even though it's the same yarn company. In fact, sometimes it is the same yarn itself. I've done self striping yarn, which has different colors. All the colors will knit just fine, but when it comes to the red stripe in the yarn, I have to go really slow because my stitches get too tight. So it's that sensitive. So it's kind of hard to say like what needle size. It really depends on what gauge, essentially. So yeah, I would say if if I'm knitting a tube for you, I can't talk about anyone else, but I would suggest to use the same needle you would use generally for sock yarn, which would be a size 0 or size 1, and use that for the tube that you got. And you will be able to look at my sock tube and go like, oh, this is a lot tighter than what I usually knit my socks on. So you would go lower than that too. Or if you think that, oh no, the stitches kind of look the same, so knit with the same needle that you knit your socks. If you find the stitches are looser than what you knit, then go up a needle size and just match the gauge if you want to. That's one way to do it. And so this is my nylon yarn or thread to separate the two sock tubes. I'm going to drop the end inside to make sure it catches on that first needle. There we go. And then for the start of the next, I'm going to add more waste yarn, 20 rows of that. Doesn't have to be exact, just enough number of rows so that the knitting doesn't come undone. Next tube. And what I also do is the label I'll attach to the sock tube so the person receiving it can know which colorway and which yarn that particular tube was, because sometimes you can't recognize. And sometimes you want to kind of just knit it again or buy that same yarn again. And they go like, that knit a really nice tube and I got some great socks out of it. In fact, I got two pairs of socks out of one tube. So then it's nice to keep a record as to which yarn is creating which tube so that you have a better reference for future socks. Okay, remove the yarn. This is exactly the same yarn. Now this is a really dark yarn. It might be that I might have to change the gauge of my knitting, but hopefully it should stay the same. But sometimes you just cannot tell until you start knitting. There is no magic formula in figuring out what to do. You just have to do it. There we go. This is also creating a very similar spiral dyed by the same yarn company. So they have a system and it usually shows up in the socks the same way. So yeah, whenever you get like ready sock tubes, I think it's always a good way to figure out like where you need to put in your afterthought heel rather than by measuring with rows. Measure with length because gauge is going to be different. It's probably not going to be the same gauge that you get with your hand knits. So you need a way to figure out where to put these heels, and I will work on putting a video together on how I do mine, and maybe that will be helpful. But I'm sure there are more than one ways to do this. So whatever works for you. I love the way this one is coming out. It has this black and speckled look to it. It looks really neat. Let me know if you have any other questions regarding sock tubes or socks or knitting in general, and I'll answer to the best of my ability. So after doing this tube, I'm going to take a break. I have only four more left after this. So now I'm getting to the point where my hand is hurting because I did how many? Eight of them. This is going to be the eighth one. Like I told you, I usually do six to seven. So this eighth one is now getting to be that, okay, this is getting too much. And I really cannot switch hands. I think Nancy, you were asking if I switch hands. I cannot because the the handle is on the right side, so it's more like a right-handed movement. I wouldn't know how to even turn it comfortably with my left hand. I'm a very right-handed person in that respect. Yeah. Okay, this one is almost coming to an end. Any more questions? Just let me know. So I will sign off right after finishing this. Close one. So this just separated by extra. If there is a whole lot of extra yarn, then it just kind of like tangles in there. So you kind of like to cut it short because then the longer it is, the more chance it will get caught and get unraveled. Well, thanks, Nancy. Thanks for your questions. Hope it helped. I need to separate another tube. I have such long tubes out here. So I'll show you again um, the sock tube separator, which is this nylon yarn out here. And you can see there are these two wonky big stitches. Let me see if I can over there. Oh, let's go there. Okay, so you see these pink stitches, which are like wonky compared to the rest. That's where the start and the end is. So I'm just going to pull one leg out. So that removes that yarn. Go to the other side. Remove that. So I have my two ends of my yarn separated. Flip it over. Pick up any stitch in the center. And because it's that nylon thread, it just slips through the stitches very easily and will come right off. And that separates my tube. See, one tube here, the other tube here. And that nylon thread I'm going to use to separate my next set out here. I have several of these nylon threads cut up, but um, I think I have 8 of them. That's why I'm falling short of them because I have 12 tubes to knit. So I'm going to just start off the next one and then I'm going to take a break because I like to set it up that when I'm sit on the machine again, I can just put on the new yarn and knit. So 20 rounds of this. Approximately 20. I think I'll always go one extra, which is fine. Cut that yarn. So we'll be ready for the next one. And I put my tool out here when I'm going to remove my weight off because I don't want to accidentally start knitting. Like you can see, this yarn is so thin that even without the weight, it looks stretched. But that's why I put that tool there to know that I have to put the weight on first before I start knitting. That's just one of the things I do. And I have 4 more skeins to do, 4 more cones to knit up. So I'll do those later. But thank you everyone for joining me. If you have any questions, let me know. If you would like sock tubes to be cranked out, if you have a big stash of sock yarn and you just want tubes out of it so you can knit the toes and heels and cuffs for Christmas or any other occasion, let me know. You can go to my website, creativewithclay.com, and there is a listing out there for knitting tubes. And I can do 64 stitch or 72 stitch tubes for you. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye.